Morning, everybody. Thanks, Claire. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. It's an absolute pleasure to be supporting Witherslack. So yeah, my name is Rachel. Just a very brief bit about my background. I was a teacher in Senko for over 20 years, and I absolutely loved being a teacher. I've been asked to speak today. I've got so many stories to share about the amazing boys that I supported throughout my career. So I hope you find today's session useful, and yet definitely ask as many questions as possible. I hope you find lots of what I talk about today relevant, but of course sometimes what I'm saying may not be particularly linked to your situation. But the reason why I'm going to talk about all the things today is because of all the families that I work with. These are many of the things that I discuss with them. So let's get started. So the aims of this morning's session. First of all, I'm just going to talk briefly about ADHD, the characteristics and the subtypes. Then I'm going to talk about the role of dopamine, the role of executive functions, and at the ADHD Foundation, we are very much a strengths-based approach charity. So I'm going to talk about a strength-based approach to supporting your boys. And then I'm going to finish with talking briefly about comorbidity. Comorbidity is just kind of like co-occurring conditions that can occur with ADHD. So ADHD is a persistent pattern of inattention and or hyperactivity and impulsivity that interferes with functioning or development. So as I said, I work with so many families, and a common theme that we talk about is with our boys, and it can be the same with our girls with ADHD. Quite often there's a common discussion around the way our boys present is quite often different in different settings, particularly the settings of home and school. On Friday, I did a face-to-face session with a number of amazing families, and that was the common theme of the day. And what they all said most of them said at the end, they felt relieved that they were very much not isolated in their experience of their boys presenting differently at home and at school. So let's just break down the different types of ADHD that may be relevant to your situation. So first of all, we have kind of the hyperactive ADHD. So, our boys with that boundless energy, kind of without much direction, lots of fidgeting, a great deal of talking. Tasks that require our boys to sit still, if hyperactive ADHD is present, is a massive challenge. And I think this is definitely quite often the situation in school. If hyperactive ADHD is present, there might be bouts of undirected energy followed by periods of real tiredness. Boys with hyperactive ADHD definitely learn best kinesthetically, kind of with their hands. So other characteristics of hyperactive ADHD are on your screen now. So the talking is excessive, just on and on and on and on. There's a real difficulty. They experience a real difficulty in sitting still. There is lots of excessive movement, lots of fidgeting. Now with the fidgeting, this might be like the big movements, like the rocking, especially the love of swinging in the chairs. When I think about boys that presented with rather hyperactive ADHD, I remember so many of them. If they wanted to answer a question in class, they had to stand up to do that, and that was very much celebrated in the environments that I worked in. Hyperactive ADHD, they are the runners, the climbers, and as I said, real difficulty in engaging in quiet activities. And then we go on to kind of the more impulsive ADHD. That need for an immediate response to a thought or desire, kind of without filter, no thought for kind of the appropriateness of what is being said. These boys with impulsive ADHD are very skilled in making spur of the moment decisions. However, with impulsive ADHD, really need to look out for kind of those times when there seems to be a misinterpretation of facts. So there's lots. Maybe you can think of lots of situations where you've had a conversation with somebody, you go away with your version of events, and they go away with maybe not the same version of events. This can be a characteristic of a difficulty with impulsive ADHD. Also with this I'm terrible at it myself, quickly looking at text messages and kind of misinterpreting the main points. This can be a challenge in school as well, around the reading of texts. I think if impulsive ADHD is present, there is very much the now, the not now, wanting to get through things and onto something else. And quite often that will lead to misinterpreting what has been read. So that's a real consideration in schools. And this sounds a bit negative, really, the lack of ability to check work. It's not that, it's just with work, if they finish the work is finished, they want to move on. This can be a challenge in school as well. And here are some other characteristics there. So kind of with that immediate, the lack of filter with what's being said, quite often because what's in the head is out straight away, there's kind of a failure to consider the consequences of what's being said. With impulsive ADHD, there's lots of kind of interrupting of others, difficulty taking turns, blurting out answers. Especially if there's like younger or older siblings, sometimes you want a sibling, you say things at home, don't you? And you know that the older siblings are going to know it, but it's more aimed for the younger ones. My friend has got 5 boys, ranging from 14 to twins of 4, and her middle son, who is 8, has ADHD. But my friend is, she's really trying to think of creative ways of kind of helping her middle son to kind of think of alternatives to blurting out the answers, to give the twins time to answer them. This one here, repeating the same mistakes, this is not a deliberate act. It's even, us as grown-ups, how many people lose their key, can't find their keys each morning, forget to put out the bins on the night. It's not a deliberate thing, but it does appear maybe to the outside eye, to the untrained eye, that it's just always repeating the same mistakes. But it's definitely not deliberate. It's just it's very much a sign of maybe impulsive ADHD. And then we go on to the last kind of type of ADHD, so inattentive ADHD. Now, this is the one, in my experience, that I've kind of had to kind of really research and develop my knowledge of over the years. I think when I think back to the boys that I've worked with, the ones that kind of you get to know very well are the more hyperactive and impulsive. So yeah, hyperactive and impulsive, with hyperactive impulsive traits. I think the inattentive boys, and I can think of many, they're the ones that kind of were, they were more tricky to get to know because of kind of the traits of inattentive ADHD. So they were, they were the daydreamers. They were the ones that kind of, they were good at starting things, but finishing things was tricky. There was a real time blindness with the boys with inattentive ADHD that I worked with, kind of, especially so. It's if something motivated them, so something in a boy who absolutely loved dinosaurs, that was great. That was fine. But if it was something that he wasn't kind of interested in, there was a real difficulty there. especially with time blindness as well, kind of if somebody with inattentive ADHD kind of gets fixed on something, you know, like, oh, you know, the leaves outside, or you know, the flock of birds or something, you know, that they may, you know, that time blindness may become an issue there. A common characteristic with inattentive ADHD is those people that are either too late, too early, or kind of miss appointments altogether. So here are some other common characteristics if inattentive ADHD is present. Kind of, yeah, so those, you know, the forgetful, the losing things, very, very easily distracted, appears to not listen, because kind of, it's like losing focus. Disorganized, kind of appearing to make kind of quite careless mistakes, difficulty following direction, and definite difficulty sustaining attention, especially if the task in hand isn't meaningful or motivating to them. So those are the 3 types of ADHD. You know, so one specifically may be relevant in your situation, or you may see traits of all of them in your situation. So when we're talking about ADHD, I'm so sorry, I can't speak this morning. A crucial factor is the role of dopamine. So dopamine is kind of our reward hormone. It's our motivator. You know, for us as adults, you know, we know that there's certain things in life that is boring, but we need to do it. But, and I think it goes for everybody, doesn't it? If we enjoy what we do, it doesn't seem so difficult. That enjoyment is our dopamine reward. It's our reward. Dopamine is our reward hormone. If ADHD is present, though, there is an issue with the transference of dopamine from one part of the brain to another, and that's where we can see some of the difficulties occur. So if tasks aren't meaningful, if tasks are boring, there is a real difficulty with the transference of dopamine. So dopamine is produced in our brain. If ADHD is present, there is a difficulty with the transference, and quite often when dopamine is traveling from one part of our brain to another, it's rejected and kind of bounced back. A little bit, so if you think about a postman delivering letters, so kind of, and the dopamine is the letter, quite often the dopamine is rejected back, and that's where difficulties can start to occur. Also on this slide is a very simple picture diagram of our brain, sorry. So our brain, the majority of our brain is developed in the womb, beginning with the back part of our brain. The last part of our brain to develop, which develops outside of the womb, is the frontal lobe, sometimes called the frontal cortex or the prefrontal cortex here. This is another really important part to discuss when we're thinking about ADHD. So this part of our brain develops, grows from when we are born and reaches maturity around 20 to 25. This part of our brain, if ADHD is present, develops a third slower. I'll go into more detail about how that can affect our children. So this part of our brain, the frontal cortex, is where we kind of sort out, we organize our executive functions. Now, our executive functions, there's 2 major components. This is where we kind of develop our self-organization skills, the ability to organize our thoughts and support kind of our, you know, goals. It also regulates our inhibition. So, you know, so regulate the ability to regulate emotions and behavioural responses. Now, it's a really important thing to consider. This part of the brain, as I just mentioned, develops a third slower if ADHD is present. It's kind of our emotional part of our brain. It has nothing to do with intelligence, but kind of more our emotional response. So if you have a boy of 9, emotionally, he may well be functioning more of a child of 6. If your son is 12, then emotionally, he may be kind of functioning more of that of an 8-year-old. And this is a major consideration throughout childhood, teens, and into adulthood. So we're going to kind of break up more the executive functions, which is crucial, which is key in ADHD. Also really, really linking it to that dopamine hit, our reward hormone. So this emotional part of our brain is where we kind of organize our impulse control. So if we think back to the different subtypes of ADHD, that thinking before acting, that is very much linked to this part of our brain, our executive functions. It also kind of keeps our feelings in check. It's our emotional control. It's where we develop our flexible thinking. So kind of being able to adjust behavior to unexpected changes. It's also where we kind of develop our working memory, being able to keep key information in mind whilst using it. I can think of giving loads of examples here of where I kind of appreciated very, very quickly with some of the boys that I taught that they needed support developing this. So when we're talking about working memory, so the kids are outside playing, so when you come in, make sure you take your shoes off in the porch, wash your hands, and then go upstairs and put your jammies on. So there's lots and lots there that kind of rely on working memory. So what was I meant to do first? Okay, shoes off. Okay, shoes off. How many, maybe in your situation, you think, oh, what was it next? How many of us have ran upstairs and gone, what have I come upstairs for? That is very much associated with working memory. There's lots of examples of that in school as well, so where tasks that our boys are being asked to do, they may be too long, they may need breaking up more. If we know that working memory is relevant, maybe like just thinking about breaking down those tasks, so instead of 4 things to do, maybe sticking to 1 thing at a time, or maybe 2, depending on your situation. So executive functioning also kind of with also thinking about our self-monitoring, our self-awareness of how we're doing in the moment. So kind of, like reading social situations. These executive functions are all very much linked, but kind of even thinking about the way you respond to certain situations. You may not like the situation, but what kind of the socially accepted emotional responses. But for our boys, this self-monitoring may be a challenge, and so all these executive functions, we're talking about what could be challenges to our boys, but then we're going to talk about what we can do to help them. So another executive function is the planning and the prioritizing, kind of being able to set and meet goals. So for us in adulthood, it's Monday morning. My God, you're amazing being here. But, so kind of, you got up this morning, okay, so I've got to do the kids' pack lunches, make sure they've got their PE kits, book bags, whatever. Before I go to work, I need to make sure that, I've put my purse in my bag, I need to get petrol on the way to work. There's lots and lots of things that we kind of do. We're planning and prioritizing all the time. There's an amazing man called Russell Barkley. He's an American psychologist. He talks a lot about working memory. He talks about kind of our executive functions being like, you know, so that inner monologue in your head, you know, that inner voice. If ADHD is present, he says that the voice is still there, but it's a lot quieter. So these executive functions are kind of, it's what's in our head motivating us to do things. So another difficulty may be difficulties around task initiation, even getting started on certain things, especially linking back to that dopamine hit. If tasks have no interest, something maybe that our boys find tricky, there may be difficulties around the task initiation, the getting started even on things. And then the final executive function is the organisation, keeping track of things physically and mentally. So you know, so maybe how many of you, you know, your boys, they come home, their PE kits, you know, there's only one shoe in their PE kit or something, you know, thinking back to the lovely, amazing boys that I taught, you know, they, you know, there was, you know, they needed help developing their organisation skills, you know, and I'll talk more about how we can support them with this. So basically, with ADHD, two major factors. It's that dopamine hit, how we can encourage that, and then really, really considering these difficulties around executive functions. Now, some of these executive functions you may say, no, my son, no, he's fine with that, but there may be certain areas of difficulty. One thing that we're starting at the foundation with these executive functions, with the boys that we're working with, depending on, you know, kind of where they're, you know, maybe with their understanding. So maybe it's more with our teenage boys. We are talking to them, you know, we talk to them about their ADHD. We explain to them that there is challenges around finding that dopamine hit, but we also we tell them about these different executive functions, and we encourage them to kind of identify the ones that they're okay with and the ones that they would like to kind of get help developing. I think that's a really, really good strategy. It seems to be working well for lots of our boys. So executive function is definitely self-awareness. It's self-directed attention. You know, there's definitely, you know, a massive thing about that inhibition, that self-restraint. So the non-verbal working memory, that's kind of what Russell Barkley goes on about. The ability to hold things in mind, like visual imagery. You know, so we've got that like inner monologue, but also so, you know, to support what we want to do, we kind of, you know, we picture the end goal. So we picture sitting in the garden at the end of the day. We picture, you know, so if it's a long car journey or something, we picture getting to the destination. I hope everybody can hear me. It's just come on that there's an issue with my connection. Hope we're all okay. Sorry about that.
Hi Rachel, just to let you know, we can still hear you. It sort of went off for a minute, but you are back on now, so don't worry.
Thank you, Claire. Sorry, everybody. So sorry. I'll say that again. So, you know, like that, the visual imagery, you know, sometimes to support things that we're not so happy with doing, we have that visual imagery. But if this is something that we can definitely help our boys with if they find that tricky. And then, sorry, the last one, the self-talk, you know, that voice in your head getting you to do so much without even realizing it. So Dr. Russell Barkley talks about this. So if ADHD is present, there is still that self-talk, but it's just a lot quieter and needs support and encouragement to get louder. So, you know, it's that emotional self-regulation. So learning to use words, images, and own self-awareness to process and alter how we think and feel about things. This is where we can help. You know, self-motivation. So especially linking back to that dopamine hit. So how you can motivate yourself to complete a task when there is no immediate external consequence. So these are all things to consider. We're going to talk about how we can help these. And then the planning and problem solving. So some experts call that self-play. So, you know, how we play with information in our minds to come up with new ways, maybe alternatives for doing things. By taking things apart and recombining them in different ways, kind of we're planning solutions to our problems. So these kind of things, in your situation, you may be thinking, yeah, that's a challenge for my son. But these are things that we can help develop and support our boys with. So just on your screen then, that just kind of really, really highlights that for our boys and our girls with ADHD, that front part of our brain, our frontal cortex, develops a third slower. We're not talking about excuses here, we're talking about facts and reasons. And I think this is definitely something to share with everybody involved with your son. We're here on a journey, aren't we, to support our boys. It's that, and I think, this is something to really, really highlight with all of the people involved with your boys. I think, I've heard in the past people refer to children, boys, as being immature. Well, actually, if they have ADHD, it is linked to the executive functions developing slower. It doesn't mean to say that it's always going to be a difficulty, but if we can identify these issues, we can help develop and we can help develop them and encourage them encourage them to develop the skills needed to help. So how can we help with these executive function difficulties? So on your screen, and you know what, on the screen here, I bet you do all of them. Really, really trying as much as possible to talk positively. So, Dan, how many times I told you, stop running down the stairs? Dan, walk down the stairs. Sebastian, do not play with your ball in the house. Stop bouncing the ball in your house. Or I said, Sebastian, take your ball outside. I think, with our ADHD boys, trying to avoid the no's and the, kind of try to as much as possible avoid the negative talk. Try to keep things positive and simple. Really, really try to by us doing these kind of things, it's going to help develop these skills in our boys. So really think about kind of listening to what our boys are saying. At the foundation, we talk a lot about validating thoughts. So going back to that kind of, the misunderstanding of conversations and things. Especially if there's like, say, common difficulties, it might be arguing with siblings. It might be there's, certain people that they clash with at school. If we can really, really listen to their version of events and validate their version of events, so they feel like, so they are able to kind of articulate how they are feeling, but then help them think of ways of maybe doing things differently. I love creating so, and when there are these difficulties, with the group of parents that I worked with on Friday, we were talking about kind of those meltdown episodes, and that might be relevant in your situation. One thing I did say to them, and I think, so say if you're in that a meltdown, it's very, very different to kind of tantrums. Meltdowns is when there's a massive feeling of being overwhelmed. And, you may see some behaviours that you want to change. What we say is the behaviour is their way of communicating. But if there are behaviours that you want to change, kind of talking about them after the event, and when things are quiet, calm, not there's no it's just there's no interruptions. This can be a really, really helpful time to talk through those tricky moments. I love I like talking about things in the car, things like this, tricky things. You're both sitting forward, can't go anywhere. There's no tricky issues with eye contact. I find that really, really a useful time. I think also maybe try asking open-ended questions, kind of definitely, talking with your boy, not at them, and I'm sure that's what you do, and being very, very clear about saying what you mean and meaning what you say. So say if there's some tricky situations, challenging behaviours that you want to change, there does need to be consequences for some challenging situations, but be just very, very clear about any sanctions. So you're grounded for a year. Do you really mean that? Does that work for you? Especially with ADHD, it's either now or not now. So maybe like just thinking about consequences that would immediately impact on the situation, and then of course any difficulties, talking calmly through them. So when we're thinking about our boys, I really, really thought about this because I work with boys and girls with ADHD, but this is very much boy specific. So I think with our boys, I think we need to play to his strengths. So thinking about that dopamine hit, looking for activities that a boy is good at and loves. So this is, I've done a lot of research into this. So you may want to just have a look up at Fiona St. Clair. So with the boys that I've taught with ADHD in the past, I use their interests as a hook. So my gosh, the knowledge, the enthusiasm that they had for certain things, I tried as much as possible to use them to kind of hook them into things that may not have been so interesting to them. So things like sports, music, things like that can override any attention problems. I think finding a favourite boy's activity and praising him for his accomplishments can remove obstacles to asking for help. So another great way to kind of hook our boys in is connecting them with good role models. So if you go onto Google and you just type in men, boys with ADHD, so many come up. And here are just a few like kind of people in the public eye who have ADHD or neurodiversity. I think a common, and it makes me really sad, a lot of the boys that I've worked with ADHD in the past do suffer from massive low self-esteem. Sometimes we call it rejection sensitivity. I know that so many of the boys, they kind of, a lot of them wouldn't even have a go at things that they knew they weren't good at or didn't feel confident with. And all I've just done throughout my career is just kind of, encourage them, encourage them for having a go, and praising effort rather than outcomes. Outcomes, yeah, but it's very much, especially with those boys who do have such low self-esteem, just really positively encouraging them. I think a great thing for this is if you have a look with him on the internet at loads of different people in the public eye with ADHD. So Michael Phelps there, there's a fab, I think it's on YouTube, there's a fab video of him talking about his experience growing up with ADHD. And look at him, look at how many gold medals he has. There's so many success stories about people living with ADHD, and especially I think it's very much in the public eye at the moment. We are a strengths-based charity, and those ADHD boys, they're insightful, they're creative thinkers, amazing at problem solving. They've got a fab ability to multitask. and look at all these, you know, these successful people here that took calculated risks. I think we need to be patient with their progress. So, you know, going back to kind of, you know, that quite often low self-esteem about certain things. I think being patient with their progress is key. So when I was a teacher, honestly, I found the most important thing with all of the children I taught was for them to feel happy and confident and safe. And I knew unless they were feeling happy, confident, safe, they weren't going to achieve, you know, their full academic, you know, potential. I also completely appreciated, I think this is why I'm not a teacher anymore, that people thrive at different times. But the only way, you know, especially our boys with ADHD, those ones with low self-esteem, the only way that they are going to thrive is kind of playing to their strengths and kind of, you know, the academic progress will come, but sometimes some of these difficulties, especially around the executive functions, can act as blockers. And unless we kind of address those kind of difficulties, their academic progress may come, the academic progress may, they may not be achieving their full potential at that time. Especially with our early teens, they're given a greater workload. But thinking back to those executive functions, maybe there's troubles, there's difficulties around those organisational skills. The ability to plan, prioritise. It may not be the actual work, but there may be kind of an overwhelming feeling of where do I start an executive function? How do I get through it? There's lots of those executive functions that may be inhibiting full academic progress. So on your screen here, there are just some practical things that you could do to help your boys. So I think, so thinking back to those executive functions, if it could, as far as school is concerned, if they could use some kind of planner, that's also a great way of you knowing kind of what they need to do, because, quite often, genuinely, they've forgotten, they're unsure of exactly what the homework was. It's a great way of supporting working memory. Also, maybe you could ask schools to kind of, if there's a title to the homework task, maybe just to support maybe those executive function difficulties, they could break down those tasks a little bit more. I think homework is a common, it can, with the families that I work with, that can be kind of common challenge. So, so what we say about, definitely establish a homework routine. Maybe thinking about it happens at the same time each day and only for a set amount of time. And so because I was a primary school teacher, and people would go, Rachel, can't get him to do his homework. And I was like, well, don't worry. So maybe, maybe just say just 10 minutes, as it's very much dependent on your situation. But if there is a difficulty with homework, speak to school, explain, that you think this is definitely part of their ADHD, and maybe just try to establish, a set time for doing a part of it, but not like kind of, if it's taking them ages and ages and ages, there is the dopamine hit is going to be lost. Maybe if they know that there's a clear beginning and end to the homework, that's going to motivate them more to get through it. And maybe with that routine, talk about rewards here, not like go to the shops and buy sweets, but maybe if you could factor something into the homework routine directly after, that they're going to love, that's going to help them get through it. So, thinking about that visual working memory. So especially with the weather being so lovely at the moment, fingers crossed, and for the whole of the summer now, maybe thinking, okay, so 20 minutes homework, and then you can go on the trampoline, 20 minutes homework, you can go out on your bike, something that's going to get them through that homework. I think also, if you think about those other difficulties with executive functions, maybe, and I know it's tricky in busy houses, but maybe providing a homework space. say if there's lots of people in the house, maybe saying, okay, just between 4 and 4:30, Dan is going to use the back room just for that time. So whilst he's doing that, we're not to distract him, and we're just going to give him that time. I think always with things like this, anything that is a challenging part of the day, a common difficulty, really think about how you are going to encourage that dopamine hit. Boys with ADHD, girls with ADHD, it's very much driven by reward, kind of what's in it for me. I think, so I kind of mentioned that, really think about setting time limits for tasks, especially if they're tricky. Also, this is really good. So say one of the boys that I work with, he loves going to brush his teeth, but this brushing of his teeth is making everybody late for school in the morning because he goes up to brush his teeth and he's in there for about half an hour. So, for those tasks that may be taking too long, maybe, again, think about the time limit. I think especially with our older boys, I think, and also I suppose again, it's your situation. I think if there's things that are a challenge to you, you need to make them part of the decision. Thinking, if there's things that aren't going, if there is behaviours that you want to change, get your boy to be part of the solution. And this is from a magazine, Teens with ADHD Needs to Scaffold and Structure. So the writer is Rira, and so she suggests parents give kids the opportunity to test their decision making by allowing them to make bad decisions. And he believes that making mistakes gives boys with ADHD some advantage over their non-ADHD counterparts when they kind of enter further education. So, you need to always thinking about trying to help develop with that emotional intelligence, helping develop those, strengthen the executive functions. Here are some other things that we kind of use with our families, to help with any of those kind of executive function difficulties. So the parents that I work with on Friday, they go, no, routine is key, and it certainly is. Routine is great for everybody, but especially for our ADHD boys. It reminds them of what is expected. It leaves things kind of not to negotiation. If there's certain things, if there's certain parts of the day that they need to do, if it's on the timetable, it's there. Also, you don't have to, you may think that, these pictures, they're not for you. You could just use, you could just write things down. But by using a visual timetable, it's really good, for those, if things are going to slightly change, thinking back to that executive function about rigidity of thinking, if there is a slight change to the routine, as long as it's in the visual timetable, they can see it's coming up and what's going to be after it. For real challenging situations, we talk about using the now and next boards. All these visual timetables are seen as common good practice and hopefully are used in most schools. I think always with our boys with ADHD, what I say all the time, we are trying to externalize all those internal thoughts. So it leaves nothing to kind of, everything is out in the open. So here are just some other practical things that you can do to help. So we do a lot of emotional coaching with children. So a lot of the boys that I work with, they can say that they're sad, they can say that they're happy, but all that bit in between is really, really tricky. The more that we can break down the emotions, we can externalize those feelings, it's going to help maybe with some of those situations that you want to change, some of those behaviors that you want to alter. When we're talking about neurodiversity, when we're talking about ADHD, it's very much part, it's a neurodiversity. Our emblem at the foundation is an umbrella. We are, although we are called the ADHD Foundation, we are a neurodiverse charity. And when we're talking about ADHD, we always do talk about comorbidity, co-occurring conditions. there's a high chance that ADHD is not in isolation. So on your screen there's a range of different neurodiversities. This list is not extensive, but with the boys with ADHD, there's a high chance that there may be other neurodiversities occurring, or maybe some traits at least. When we're talking about neurodiversity, here on your screen really just puts it kind of into context. So up to 4 in 5 people with ASD, autism, may have DCD. 1 in 2 people with DCD may have ADHD. 1 in 2 with ADHD may have tic disorder, and so on. So I'm very conscious of the time. So the highest common co-occurring condition is, so we like to say ASC, autistic spectrum condition, but medically, clinically, it's called ASD. You may know it as autism. So ADHD and ASC occur together at levels of very high frequency. 50 to 80% of children and young people with ADHD would meet the criteria for ASC. 30 to 80% of children and young people with ASC would meet the criteria for ADHD. So with a lot of the boys that I've worked with in the past, especially because I was a primary school teacher, you know, so some of the boys that presented with certain difficulties in, like, say, the nursery class, by the time they were in, like, maybe juniors, there was different things were coming more apparent. With a lot of the boys that I taught, you know, maybe on ADHD pathway or with an ADHD diagnosis, a lot of them we did also explore ASC as well. I love this picture here. This just really emphasizes, so, you know, so for our boys, we just want the best. We love them, don't we? But, you know, there's so much pressure, isn't there, about academic learning. But look at all that, you know, with the strong foundations that must be present before academic learning is achieved. The reason why I put this on is to talk just briefly about the senses. So when we're thinking about the senses, so we have our vision, we have our listening, our auditory, we have our taste, we have I can't think which ones. So we have our smell. So we have the 5 senses, but also we have 3 other senses. So we have our vestibular sense, which is our sense of balance, our proprioception, which is our coordination, and our interoception, that's like kind of our inner body, you know, our feelings, you know, knowing what, like when you're hungry or tired and things, that's all our interoception. The reason why we talk about, so for our boys with ADHD, there's lots and lots going on there, you know, so with the dopamine, with our executive functions, but quite often, you know, they're having to do a lot to deal with their senses. So receiving the sensations from the surrounding environment, putting them into their brain, organizing, interpreting, and responding. The reason why I talk about this is because I think a lot of the boys with ADHD that I taught did have some kind of sensory processing challenges as well. And so with so many of the boys that I worked with, PE was, or swimming, something like that, you know, that kind of, you know, so have that organ, like, you know, the organization and stuff. I turn around and, you know, so maybe they'd have their shoes on but not their socks, or their jumpers on but not their t-shirts underneath. But, you know, like, even just to really kind of really consider that sense, you know, those senses, you know, so the importance of sensory integration, you know, it's massive. So just even simple tasks involve so many of our senses. So thinking about, you know, like putting your pajamas on, so you have to pay attention to the person speaking, hear what they say, screening out any other information, not becoming distracted from the task, finding the pajamas, make a plan how to put them on, finding the arm and head openings, and having the body awareness, you know, to put the arm into the right place and all that. it's just kind of to highlight maybe those kind of sensory integration, maybe that might be relevant to you. I'm just going to end though, because that was kind of a whistle stop of how we can support our boys. But as I said at the beginning, I hope I said at the beginning, we at the ADHD Foundation are a strengths-based charity. And I absolutely love this last slide. So whichever, ever neurodiversity we support, we always think about it from a strengths-based position. Now, there's lots there, okay, but I love because I've realised the time, so I can't, but they're there on the screen for you to read. But I love the one about ADHD. So our ADHD boys are insightful. They are creative thinkers and problem solving. All strengths associated with ADHD. An amazing ability to multitask and take calculated risks. So many of the boys I've taught have been with ADHD have been so loving, enthusiastic, funny, and when there's so many boys that I've taught in the past, and I still know so many of them now. They were, they made my job so rewarding. I think with anybody, so this is great for you as well. So if there is ever any negativity attached to neurodiversity, I urge you to really think about this and think back to all those people in the public eye with neurodiversities. I only put a few on there, but there is so many. So this morning, I've talked about the ADHD, its characteristics and subtypes even, some practical tips to help a strength-based approach, and just very briefly at the end about the co-occurring conditions. So thank you very much everybody for listening. It's been an absolute pleasure, but I think hopefully there are some questions now, Claire.
Yeah, Rachel, we've had loads come through, as you can imagine. So we'll do about 10 minutes now of a Q&A, and where we'll just try and get through as many as we possibly can. Okay, so the first one I've got here. So what effect does puberty have on boys with ADHD? I have a 12-year-old who is struggling.
That's a really great question, and I must apologise, I can't believe I mentioned that. So puberty does it. So puberty brings with it common difficulties anyway, doesn't it? And also, what I should have said is between the ages of about 13 to 17, there is a massive rewiring of the brain that is kind of the same that happens when our children are toddlers. So puberty definitely plays a major impact. What I would say, so if there's behaviours that you want to change, really try to work on externalizing all those internal thoughts. Think about that emotional coaching, kind of naming the different emotions. So your son's 12, so he's 12 and there's hormones kicking in then, definitely, but also really consider that emotionally he still may be functioning of that of an 8-year-old. So really, it's hard, isn't it, when there's people like with lots of opinions around saying they should be doing this, they should be doing that. But I would really maybe just, and it's very much dependent on your situation, just really consider that possible lack of the difficulty with emotional maturity. But yeah, definitely hormones can, really bring its own challenge.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. So we'll move on now to our next question. Any tips for helping an 11-year-old who is about to transition to high school this summer?
Yeah, so it's a key. That's key. So what I would do, make sure, as much as possible, if he can visit the new school, what I used to do with the boys that I used to support, maybe if he could visit the school, maybe if there's like anxiety attached to that, could he visit the school when there's no children there, so like out of hours? But then could he go back and maybe visit when there is children there? So he kind of gets a real picture of what the physical building is like, what it's like. But because I think if he went straight away when there's loads of kids there, he may be overwhelmed. Also with the boys that I've worked with transitioning to high school in the past, we do, so it depends on how you're going to get there. So, you know, taking them on the bus, you know, getting them used to the journey, encouraging them. But if the high school's near enough to walk, maybe over the summer holidays, dropping, like, you know, maybe dropping them off at the school and getting them to walk back on their own, just small steps. If, you know, if he needs lots of visual imagery, maybe take photos of the journey to the school, looking on the website, seeing whether you can be linked up to who, like say the year 7 leaders, get some photos of the staff, kind of really, and really, so especially because we've got the summer term coming up, and it's a major transition, but just trying to normalize it as much as possible, and lots of small steps, just really thinking about the journey, even thinking about, so you know, like what's he like with money, you know, in different high schools sometimes you've got, you know, there's a thumb thing that you use, and that sometimes they have to use money. Just really identify all those things that he's going to have to kind of deal with, and do as much as you can to try and support him and kind of prepare him for it with lots and lots of practice.
Okay, so another one about school here, but my child is school refusing most days, and the school is trying to help with this. But do you have any tips for encouraging him to school every day?
Yeah, so this is a real common difficulty, and I know it can be upsetting, it can be stressful to all involved, and I'm glad that the school are being supportive. What I would suggest is their anxiety over like too many people there. Can he get dropped off maybe earlier or slightly later? Is there a certain entrance that he's going through that's causing him anxiety? You know, I think with this situation, and again, I'm working with a family at the moment with exactly this issue. It's good that school is on board, but school is something that he has to do. So, you know, so externalizing that. So, but again, so maybe validating his thoughts and opinions. So ask him about his version of events. So really trying to unpick the issues. Is it around anxiety over it being too busy? Is it because the work is too challenging? Is it because there's certain teachers, certain people that you clash with? As much as possible, try and unpick the issues, and really, you know, thinking about that, him being part of the solution. Can he think of different ways of doing certain things? Maybe that dopamine hit, you know, thinking about rewards in place. So can he be given special jobs when he gets to school to kind of, you know, lessen his anxiety? I worked very closely with the caretaker, and he was great with those boys that maybe were reluctant to come into school. He was great at taking them under his wing, getting him to do special jobs, making as much as possible, thinking about that dopamine hit, that self-esteem, but making sure that trying to give him the opportunity to explain fully what the issues are, acknowledging those issues, validating his thoughts, but then together with school kind of having a plan to move forward.
Thanks, Rachel. So some great advice there. So I'll move on to, we'll try and squeeze another 1 or 2 questions in.
Yeah,
so any advice on my son's inability to control his anger? He loves football, but just struggles emotionally and ends up hurting other kids or himself.
Yeah, so this again, you know, so when I did mention, I touched on that meltdown behavior. And it very, unhelpfully people say, yeah, they're just naughty. They are not. This is to do with his challenging around executive function and being overwhelmed. So it's great that he loves football. So when we talk about meltdown behavior, we talk about it being the fight, flight or freeze response. And that goes way back to when we were living in caves, that it stems from a really quite an unhelpful part of our brain called the amygdala, that the amygdala triggers the fight, flight or freeze response. And in modern day society, that may be with him issues over the rules of football, people not sticking to the rules, him getting really excited, or he's driven by wanting to do very well at football, and other people may be annoying him. I think again, so you've identified what the issue is, talk to him about those issues. So you love football, but there's this problem, okay? What's your version of that? What do you see happen? Kind of do, I used to do like comic strips with children, I still do comic strips, that what happens, what the problem is, he's hurting, okay? So as a result of that problem, what happens? So he may have to go off the pitch for 5 minutes, or, he gets into trouble, which is negative, okay? So this is the problem, he does a slide tackle, what could you do? So kind of, an alternative to the behavior that you want to see less of. And also thinking about that dopamine hit. So ways to kind of, so if he chooses, if he manages to kind of control his emotions whilst playing football, what reward could you put into place? Also, if it does sound like it's that fight, flight or freeze response, is there something that's going to help him? Does he need to go and have 5 minutes cool down? Does he need to speak? Is there somebody that he can speak to? I think if it's a regular occurrence, having somebody that he can regularly speak to about it, possibly not mum or dad, possibly somebody kind of like a learning mentor kind of role, to talk through his version of events, that will help. But it's a real common difficulty. But again, he loves football, so it would be awful if he didn't play football. So we need to kind of talk about what the issue is and kind of making him part of the solution. How are we going to kind of try and make this better?
Thanks, Rachel. Okay, so last question for today. So do you find that ADHD causes boys to overeat or not know when they are full? And have you got any ideas on how to manage this?
So overeating can be, thinking back to the sensory integration, that can be very much, it could be part of an issue over interoception, like so that internal feeling. It could also be to do with the dopamine hit. So the food is making, I love eating food myself, but that's how he's getting his dopamine hit. We do talk a lot about diet at the foundation. There's certain things in the diet can help with ADHD difficulties. So there's certain things that you can eat. With ADHD, there's a common issue with iron. Quite often, if ADHD is present, iron, there's a 50% deficit in iron. So thinking about with a diet for ADHD children, boys, lots of protein, lots of complex carbs. Try to avoid the white carbs, which gives that instant. So it's like a white carb. It's like it's sugar, isn't it? There's a mass that with kind of the white carbs in the diet and sweets and things, there is a massive spike in dopamine. But what we're trying to do is kind of to get dopamine to be released, more on regulating dopamine. So if we can replace any white carbs, which will kind of put on more weight, with a more protein rich, iron diet with complex carbs like the brown breads, the grains, that's going to help. But yeah, overeating is a common difficulty, but I think I think it's a lot to do because it's helping, he's getting that dopamine hit from the delicious food, but also it could be to do with sensory integration.
And that brings us to the end of today's webinar.